So, as I mentioned in the previous video, we will now need to find a way to automatize the process of deploying this new image, deploying a new image of this from this container registry to the Azure Web App Service. And if we go to the deployment center and the settings pane here, we can see that there is this option for continuous deployment. And well, this switch alone doesn't do much, but we are interested in this webhook URL here. So this URL basically launches a new deployment event on this Azure Web App Service. So when this webhook URL is called, the deployment is rerun from the Azure, so it then refetches the application from this container registry. So we need to essentially call this webhook URL from the GitLab pipeline. So let's go ahead and copy the URL here, save the continuous deployment. I guess that this option needs to be turned on in order for the new deployment to begin when the webhook URL is called. So I guess this also has to be turned on here. Okay, but now on GitLab there is a way to, when we go to the settings pane here and webhooks, we can see that there is a possibility to call webhooks in certain events, and for example this push event here triggers when a push to the repository happens, and this sounds good, but the problem is that we want the pipeline to actually call the webhook URL, and the pipeline currently triggers on push event. So if this webhook URL is placed here and set to trigger on the push event, the problem is that this deployment will then start at the same time as the pipeline, and for example the software testing and the containerization stages of the pipeline here, they don't execute. They don't have time to execute since the webhook is triggered at the same time. So we need to somehow call this webhook after these two pipeline stages. And one way to do that is to utilize these environments and deployments on GitLab, and we can go ahead and see it for ourselves. Let's see where it is. It's on the deployments and environments section here. So environments in GitLab is a place where code gets deployed, and well, this will get more clear once we now make a new environment. So let's go ahead and make this environment, call it production environment. Let's set the URL to match this URL of the domain that Azure provided us. So here we have this deployment here now. As the GitLab suggests, we need to add some things to our CI pipeline file in order to utilize this environment. So what we are going to do is add a new stage to this gitlab.ci, gitlab.ci.yml, that will essentially trigger a new deployment here. And then we will set this webhook that I talked about earlier to launch on the deployment event rather than push event. So let's see, we have here this deployment event, so we will check that. We can already go ahead and save the webhook here. Now we have a webhook that will call the Azure Web App Service deployment, or this Web App Service where deploy process on when the when a deployment is made on GitLab. So here we can see that this webhook is now called when a deployment event happens on the GitLab. So the next thing to do is to, like I said, update the YML file to include a new stage, which will trigger a new deployment, which in turn will then launch the Azure deployment process. So hopefully this makes sense, and we will continue from this in the next video.